Now we're recording. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. I am Erin, and I'm a nurse in the state of Massachusetts, going on 25 years, a medical freedom activist, a health and fitness educator, board certified holistic nurse. Thank you so much for being here. Today is a little different because you're going to hear a personal story from a mother, and she has, unfortunately, a sad and tragic story. This is a very personal story for her and difficult to speak of because it's so very fresh. And I'm going to let Michelle tell her story with my support. And she did agree to be here today because she does want her story to be known. Okay, so Michelle, you have many children and you've had home births and you were pregnant and due to have a child last April 2020. And you had a home birth then, correct?
I did, yes. I was very happy to avoid hospitals in the beginning of COVID.
Right. And you didn't have
Mhm.
to deal with the mass and the separating the baby and getting tested and all that.
And sorry about the
Luckily.
background noise. My
Don't worry.
my kids are outside the door.
It's okay. All right. And say her name again.
So my baby's name, yes, we had a long-awaited baby girl. I have a lot of boys, and so my two girls were just thrilled to have a baby sister. And so Avonlea Grace is her name, and she
Okay.
was born April 5th, a beautiful home birth, and just such a beautiful baby. I felt so lucky to have this perfect, healthy baby. And yeah, we thought everything was fine until 6 weeks when I took her to the doctor, and that's where the adventure began.
So was she having some symptoms at 6 weeks?
She had started to breathe quite fast, and when you're just home because the world was shut down, so it was the first time I had her around another baby that I really didn't like her color. She was more ashen. I had noticed that she had a darker complexion than some of my other children, but it was really the side by side comparison that I was like, oh, and then she had started to breathe quite fast. So we were, you research online and thought maybe asthma or something. And so yeah, I set up a doctor's appointment, and I have a great doctor, and he sent me to the hospital with her, and he diagnosed a heart murmur that was concerning to him. So I made arrangements with my other children and took her to the hospital about 40 minutes south of us, called my husband on the way, and but we weren't, you just don't go to her, you don't go to heart deformity. And
Right.
so I called my husband and let him know, and then yeah, they at the hospitals where she was diagnosed, my once it's an escalation. The doctor, they start with an x-ray, and then all of a sudden the faces get really serious, and then they order the echocardiogram. And at that point I had called my husband and let him know that it wasn't asthma. And so he had come to the hospital, and they well, I guess I should slow down. You can tell me how you want to know things, but this was the first thing. Was I was in my mask holding my baby, and it's hard because a 6-week-old baby is smiling and is
Right.
very interactive, and so I'd never worn a mask around her. But anyway, my husband had gotten to the hospital and they wouldn't let him in, so I learned by myself that my baby didn't have a left half of her heart. And
Okay. Let's stop there.
okay.
So you were you in the emergency room?
Yes, I took her. They were waiting for me, the emergency room at
Okay.
at the
Because
hospital.
this is very important. They didn't let your husband in the hospital when you were finding out that your baby had a heart deformity.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you were there by yourself.
I was, and um, there's such a huge learning curve, and all of the emotion and the shock to all of it, and so trying to listen to the doctor, make the phone call to my husband, hear from him that he's in the waiting room and they won't let him in. Here, I mean, the chaos of it all. And then just, when you get that kind of news, you need to be able to hold each other. And he needed to be able to be with his daughter. And so, yeah, so that's like it is. I'm glad you're pausing there because I don't always stop and think about every step along the way, how not okay it was.
That is absolutely not okay. And that's why you're speaking today.
It
As
is.
difficult as it is for you, um, the world needs to hear your story.
Yes, and I should clarify. So in the hospital, my husband had come before I knew. He had come. I had called him after they had done the X-ray and while they were doing the echocardiogram, I think is what it was. And so he had time to get there, and they had refused to let him in. So we had waited, and then I was like, "Well, go home and take care of the kids because they're home alone." And I mean, I have older ones, but so he was driving on his way home when they came and told me that the doctor had said to me, "If it's something we can handle with medication, she'll be admitted here. If it's something that requires surgery, then she'll need to be life flighted to a hospital that's about a little over an hour north of where we were." And so when he came in and told me that, he just said it's life flight. And that's when I kind of lost it, and my husband was driving, so I called him. And then after that, the cardiologist came in and explained the situation. He did a really good job helping me understand that we were most likely going to lose her. And so my husband was on the road when he heard the news, and there was no, there just wasn't any, I don't know. There was not much comfort to be had, but little did I know what would happen from there. So the
So
life, oh, go
let's
ahead.
just pause there for a minute. So you went from having what you thought a happy, healthy baby to all of a sudden having to be life flighted
Hmm.
without the
Yeah,
support, the emotional, physical support of your husband being there.
right.
That is so much to take on. I can't imagine your thoughts then, what you were going through, how fast, and it was like a whirlwind probably.
It
Just
was.
going,
I think I was in shock,
yeah.
as I look back. But then what happened? So I wear my babies. I don't leave, they don't take bottles usually. Like, I'm a really hands-on
Mhm.
mama. And so car seats, my babies are colicky and sometimes have reflux. So I struggle with car seats anyway. And so my thought was, I'm going to hold her in the helicopter because I don't know how much longer I get to hold her, and a helicopter crash isn't her danger at this point. So that's kind of where my brain was. I was geared up to say, no, I'm going to hold my baby. And I mean, obviously naive, but also, I know I was in shock. And so I was gathering my bag and, trying, and the life flight people came, and it's a bit of a blur, but I know the nurse took her from me and they strapped her down, and I said, I want to hold her. And they just said, oh, not on life flight. And you can't argue anyway. But then the next thing I knew, um, the life flight people wheeled her away, and I was not allowed to go. I was held from behind, and I was like, my baby, and they just said, oh, not during COVID. Um, and so in the course of 10 minutes, I learned that my baby would most likely pass away. And then she was torn from my arms and taken. And and I had nothing to do but walk out of the hospital and get in my van and start driving to their hospital. And I was just getting kind of closer to the freeway as the helicopter went above. I heard the helicopter and saw it drive over my car with my 6-week-old baby who had never before been out of my presence. And that's, I just, you just can't believe, you, like there's no way to explain that feeling and the shock that that can happen. That I mean, the doctor was like, "Are you okay?" And, I mean, sure. And I just drove myself to the other hospital for over an hour. So that was where was just I obviously there was so much that I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I was just desperate to get to the other hospital. And I called my husband because he'd already almost made it home. And I just said, "Go, honey, go to the other hospital. You'll get there before I will. And she's alone." And so he went and got there about a half an hour, 40 minutes before I did. But even after she got there, they wouldn't even let him see her for 15 minutes. And he didn't know why, he knew the life flight arrived. But anyway, so that was the situation at that point. And do you pause me when you
Um,
want?
in life flight on a normal day, they would allow the parent to go,
They always do.
and they didn't let you go because of COVID.
Hmm. Yeah. And um, so I got to the other hospital, and I was quite frantic and went running in, and they do your temperature and mask and all the nonsense. And I ran up to the cardiac ICU and picked up the phone. It's all secured, and said, "This is I'm Avonlea Stone's mother. I just got here," and she said, "Just a minute," and then she came back and said, "I'm sorry, she already has her visitor. You need to go home and come back in 24 hours."
Wait. They said she already had a visitor? And
So apparently the hospital's policy was that you could have 2 visitors total and 1 visitor every 24 hours. So if one person came, no other person could come for 24 hours.
for a baby? A 6-week-old?
It's a children's hospital, and they told me that, a nurse later on told me I should consider myself lucky, because if she were 18, she wouldn't be allowed a visitor at all. So those children that turned 18 and were in the hospital for months with no one allowed to visit. And their policy is so thoughtless that a nursing mother that was
Okay.
their
Oh,
response.
let's stop there. You're breastfeeding,
Hmm.
and they're not allowing you to breastfeed.
Well, so they have a baby life flighted in that is critical with a severe heart complication, and they didn't let me ride on life flight. I drive over an hour to get there, and their first response is, "Go home and come back in 24 hours." I don't know that I don't know how those are human beings, honestly.
How is the baby being fed?
They didn't, none of those questions are asked, because the only things that matter are COVID. That's everyone's brain only was concerned about COVID. And so there was no, anyway, I like, so that, so, well, that's, so it, what ended up happening, because that was the first time that I really lost it. I screamed at her pretty good. She just said, "I'm sorry, I apologize." And I just screamed, and that matters more than I learned that my baby is going to die. Like, and she said, she repeated it, and I started screaming at her. So she said, I mean, like you would do, I'm a pretty calm person, but go home. And when we didn't know if she had hours or days, and yeah, anyway, so
So let's pause there for a minute. So 6 weeks, this baby hasn't left your arms.
well, in her crib to nap, but no,
Right.
yeah,
With you, you're a stay-at-home mom,
hmm
loving and caring.
yeah,
They
and she's the youngest of a big family, so there were lots of people that
lots
loved
of
and held
love.
this baby.
Yes. And you go from that to her being life flight in a helicopter to being told to go home.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so the lady said, "Just a minute, ma'am," and hung up. And I fully expected security to come and escort me out of the hospital. Luckily, the head nurse came out and very sternly informed me that under the circumstances, they were going to make an exception. And so there was that, like I was, of course, so thankful, but it was
But you
an
had
exception.
to actually have an adult temper tantrum to get
Yeah.
to get in there.
To have any sanity take over.
So they allowed you to go in.
And that's not where you want to be
Right.
focusing in this situation,
Exactly.
And so, yes, so they let me go in, and my husband and I were allowed to be there together for a few minutes. Until
So they let you in, and then they let your husband in for a few minutes.
my husband was already in there,
He was already in there.
which was
Okay.
the reason I needed to go home.
Okay.
And so they let me come in, and they didn't kick him out immediately. They gave us a few minutes to be together before they kicked him out.
Oh my God.
And so that was just sacred time, those 10 minutes. And then they informed me that she needed to be COVID tested, and this was with the nasal swab. And
a baby?
this is a 6-week-old baby whose heart was so stressed out that crying was not good for her.
Right.
And there was nothing about her condition that in any way had anything to do with COVID. There was this is not about patient care. So, and you're trying so desperately to protect your baby because it's hard for babies to be in the hospital. They're having tape ripped off their skin. They're being, they're just, you're much softer with your baby than the doctors and nurses are. And so I was trying to, protect her. And anyway, I begged them, like, why does she need to be COVID tested? She's not, she's a 6-week-old baby with a heart defect. And they told me that if they refused, she would not be allowed to stay in the hospital. And I begged them to test me. I said, she's not been out of my presence. If she has it, I have it. So test me instead. And they refused and told me that they would kick her out if I didn't let her be COVID tested.
Okay. So, let's take a break there for a minute. I wasn't aware and that babies get COVID. And if they do, it's extremely rare, and especially in the beginning. I don't think any babies that I'm aware of have been tested positive for COVID. Somebody can, say I'm wrong. But for them to tell you, if you don't do this, she'll get kicked out of the hospital. In that moment in time when you're dealing with your dying baby and they're threatening you.
Yes.
And you're logical and trying to bring logic to the situation, and they're not having it.
Not at all. It was, I've thought about this a lot. And the best explanation I can find, and no one's offered a better one, is hospitals were given more money for COVID patients. And so
yes,
the best I can see is the lawyers and businessmen say these are the COVID policies with no thought of patient care. And then the nurses go along with it. The doctors and nurses go along with it. And nobody stands up and says, this is wrong. Every step in this process was wrong. And it's so easy for everyone to just live in their bubble of fear or wear a mask and do what's kind without any thought or awareness of what we are actually doing and becoming as a society. Because, well, not only did she need to be COVID tested, but I wasn't allowed to be in the room during the test or until the test results came back. Or if it happened to come back positive, and there are so many false positives.
Right.
If it happened to come back positive, I would need to be quarantined in that room for 14 days. And I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and so so how do you protect your baby? All you want to do is protect your baby. Do I protect her by letting her stay in the hospital? But I have to do this and I can't even be here. And and they told me the results would come back quickly, but after I sat in the car for, I don't know if it was an hour and a half or 2 hours while I'm sitting there not with her because the test results hadn't come back. And I have to also worry about my children at home that can't be without me for 14 days. And, and I, not that she would even live that long, but that's what they threatened me with. And so finally, after about an hour and a half or 2 hours, I was, forget this, and I went back in the hospital, and the results didn't come back for 7 hours or so, and they were negative, luckily. But the, like there was nothing about that in any way that was about patient care, about humanity, compassion, nothing. It was about money. And how much more money can we get by abusing this patient with an unnecessary test?
So you had there was no family in the room for 7 hours.
Well, no, it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours
Okay.
because I went back in,
Good,
but they
okay.
would have kept me out for 7
I
hours.
see. Okay.
And, you have to be there because, like I said, you're like patients, especially patients who can't even speak for themselves, need an advocate. I look at it as a blessing now that my little 2-year-old was spent some time in the hospital as a newborn, because I really learned how important it is, for me to be
Yes.
there. There were lots of things that happened that I had to disagree with. And anyway, like I was frantic about having her alone in the hospital. That's not okay. And so that was the next thing that happened that just boggled my mind. I could not understand it.
What happened?
I mean, the COVID test.
Okay. And then
Mhm. And so we went from there. My husband was allowed to stay in with me for a few minutes until they did the COVID test. And then so he stayed with me in the parking lot, and then they wouldn't let him back in. So I went back in alone, and that time in the car is when we called our children and told them, and so then I went back in the hospital and my husband came home, and the situation with the 24 hours meant that my husband would not get to see his daughter again because there was no way I was staying away for 24 hours.
what is the situation with the 24 hours?
The You can only have one visitor every 24 hours. So
And
if
how long could you stay for? Could you stay?
so the visitor could stay the whole time.
Okay.
But if my husband ever came,
You
then
had
I
to
wouldn't
leave.
be allowed to come back for 24 hours. If he traded, and do you know, you could only have one at a time. But if my husband wanted to come in and see, we couldn't be together. And if he had been able to come in and hold her, then I wouldn't have been allowed to come back for 24 hours. And you can't be away from a nursing baby for 24 hours. And so we knew that he had said goodbye. And so,
So
but
they're having you follow rules with a dying baby,
mhm.
like a theoretical,
Completely illogical, nonsensical rules.
illogical, and written on paper rules when you have a dying baby.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay.
So I went back in the hospital, and then she was in the hospital for 2 days because the doctors wanted to pursue a surgical option. There is a surgical procedure for this condition. Um, it's not a good one. It's kind of a fix, and if she
Yeah.
survives to the next operation, they do another fix. And
Mhm.
so we were trying to decide they, usually this is caught in the ultrasound, and for some reason ours wasn't, which I actually think of as a blessing because we got to have my pregnancy and then 6 weeks of our baby and just bliss. And so I'm not I feel like there was a blessing in that. But so we had to figure out what to do. So when you have a baby with a condition like this, because you can't even like, I now know hypoplastic left heart syndrome, but I couldn't say that for a month after, I mean, there's just this learning curve that you can't wrap your brain around because it's combined with so much emotion and trauma, and you're so new to all of it. And so I was there in the hospital with the doctors. Well, so okay, there are a couple of different elements to this. I want to back up for a minute and first say that the hospital policy was that you had to be masked at all times. So I'm in the hospital for 2 days with my 6-week-old baby, not allowed to kiss her or smell her or smile at her and let her return my smiles. So of course, anytime that I was alone in the room, and it was the ICU, so that wasn't a lot, I did not have my mask on, but anytime a nurse came in, some nurses were better than others, but like that first day, the nurse just said, "Ma'am, you have been warned several times, about the mask."
So
and it's
another threat. Another threat.
and the mamas out there understand like the desperation to drink in every moment with this beautiful little gift that I had, and the pain of not being able to kiss her, smell her, smile at her. It's hard to describe that experience. It was not okay. That was not okay at all. So I'm dealing with forced to be wearing a mask with this, this sweet little baby that's she of all my children, she just smiled and so good natured, and you could just see her eyes just looking for me, so desperate to see my smile and not understanding, and so that sets the tone for what the experience was in the hospital.
So you had to wear a mask with your own baby, even when nobody was in the room.
Well, I would take it off every time no one was in the room, but as soon as they came back in,
But the rule
let me
was
in.
you're supposed to keep it on,
Mm-hmm.
even when you're alone.
Mm-hmm. And so and like I said, some nurses were much less enforcing of it,
Well, thank goodness we need more of those nurses.
I know. But yeah, some were very, and all of them did have to keep saying, like, we need you to put your mask on, and so anyway, so that's the situation. And then the doctors were coming in and telling me all of this information, like, this is the option. We need to do this procedure first. We need to, so when my husband had gotten there, the nurse that had been there with him before I arrived had really pumped him full of false hope. Oh, I see babies with this condition all the time. They do great. So he, when I got there, was like, she's gonna be okay, babe. She's gonna be okay, and the doctor in Provo had really prepared me that she wasn't likely to make it. And so my husband went home after just those few minutes, and this nurse, so he had a different expectation than I had. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we had to make life and death decisions about our daughter, about her care, if we would pursue a surgical option or bring her home so her siblings could say goodbye. And that's an impossible decision to make under any circumstances, but we had to make it over the phone. So like, I would talk to the doctors and try to get the information, then behind masks, then call my husband and try to explain to him what they had said. And he had all of his questions that I would have to try to remember for the next time the doctors came back. Right. Like trying, and you're focusing on your baby, but so he was not allowed to be there to hear the information and to help make the decisions. And it was hard because his feeling was, we need to give her every possible chance. We need to do whatever we can. And my feeling was, we need to not put her through that. And we need her, I mean, obviously, if there had been like a fix, if it were like, we do this surgery and she recovers, but where it was, if she survives these 3 surgeries, then there's a 50% chance she can make it to 15 without needing a heart transplant. And that's if that was a big if, because she was already 6 weeks old. So her heart had already been enlarged and stressed. And so anyway, so it was a horrible reality to be facing and trying to understand. I mean, the little parts I would understand bit by bit and try to communicate to my husband, but then you know what I'm trying to say? Like, these are
Yes.
not situations when parents should be separated.
I mean, when you have something going on with your health and you have a regular doctor's appointment, say somebody's concerned that they could have cancer, usually you bring someone to the doctor with you because you're not in the perfect state of mind to take everything in
Fully.
like a sponge.
Uh-huh.
And you won't hold it and you'll forget. So that's why you bring somebody with you, and they always say that, and you can write things down and ask questions. So now you're in the hospital, your baby's dying.
And also, let me say that
Yep,
also the emotional support is critical, essential. Someone to share that
absolutely.
experience with you and be there to hold you together.
Absolutely. And did they have social services come in and speak?
Well,
Oh, and
so
one more thing
no,
before I forget. So, but I just want to make this so that people understand, when a baby is born with your type of condition and they say they could have surgery, sometimes it's just like a Band-Aid. So like you said, it's not going to fix things. It might, it's just like a
it might
Band-Aid.
give them more time, but
Exactly. Yeah. So,
and there are some children that do well with this condition,
mhm.
with the surgeries. It's usually caught much sooner, before damage is done to their heart. And it is, at best, it is lifelong surgeries, but
Yes.
we didn't have the best situation.
Right.
And so for me, the most likely outcome was that she would die in recovery from the surgery and never get to see. I mean, her sibling, like my little 10-year-old daughter that had waited for this baby sister, needed to be able to say goodbye. And none of them were allowed in the hospital. None of them were, like, the COVID conditions affected what we could pursue, because I couldn't, I mean, I knew it meant months in the hospital, and I couldn't leave her alone in the hospital. But my little children at home couldn't be without their mother for months.
Right.
And my
Right.
husband wasn't
Right.
allowed to come and take a shift. And so it just felt like the love and the family togetherness was the important thing, you know?
I feel that. I feel that. Yes.
And yeah, and where there wasn't a good likelihood of a positive outcome
Hmm.
surgically. They really, really wanted to do the exploratory surgery where they just did a catheter with,
Hmm.
they really wanted to do that, so they could say so they could know how likely a positive outcome was. But just that's the thing my husband and I guess we're having to, I don't want to say argue, but we're trying to come to a consensus on, and I just was like, I just felt like we need to have her home. Like, her siblings need to be able to see her and say goodbye. This baby was very, very loved, you know.
Yes.
And so anyway, we finally, and I want to also say this because the doctors were for the most part quite wonderful. There were two doctors in particular who both, independent of each other, when they came to talk to me, they removed their masks. And it's hard to explain how kind that was. There's something about this is not information to be said behind a mask. They didn't make me put mine on, and they actually took theirs off when they were talking to me because they just inherently understood the importance of human connection. And I, that has really stuck with me because of how it affected me, how it felt when they did that. It was so kind and so respectful and so human when I was dealing with so much inhumanity. And so I know palpably what masks do to us as humans. And it's not nothing, you know. And so finally we'd made the decision to bring her home, and the doctors actually, like they kind of decided that surgery wasn't likely to be successful. And so they, they kind of like they agreed with that decision, but I think that they have to try as long as they can, so so we brought her home on Tuesday evening, and we were very blessed to be able to have a family picture Wednesday morning. That was the one thing I really wanted. I hadn't had, one of my children had been abroad when she was, anyway, we just didn't have a picture with all of my children in it. So we were able to do a family picture and then have a christening for her. And then she passed away that afternoon. So with our family here. So that was that experience. And hospice had been set up, but she passed away by their first visit. So social services came, and they were kind. They wore their masks. At that point, I did not want anyone around me in a mask. Like, I just felt I'll just say the evil of masks. They had been evil in my life, And anyway, so the social services, it was interesting because they said, well, they told me all about the wonderful things they could offer to help my children cope, because it's so interesting as the mother, because you are mourning, but you're trying to keep your children together too. It's quite an experience. And so they told me about like the ranch they have with horses and the ropes courses, and all of the wonderful things that they could have offered our family if it weren't for COVID. And so
you're saying that was shut down?
all of it was shut down. So they came and basically were like, we're sorry, we have nothing to offer you. These are all the wonderful things we usually would be able to do, but hopefully it will be open in a few months. And we were just left completely on our own. There was no support. And so the dismal feeling of wanting, well, you can't have anything you want, but at least a funeral would be healing, to see your neighbors and your congregation together and your family, and no funerals. We were blessed to be able to plan an outside funeral so that we didn't have to use masks, because, and but not one member of my one member of my congregation came to the funeral. And so
do you think that was out of fear?
It was completely COVID. It was just completely COVID, that there weren't supposed to be funerals, there weren't supposed to be And it was in May. Well, I guess that was in the beginning of June. She passed away before Memorial Day, so we had to postpone her funeral a little bit because it was all busy. And so, um, and I don't want to, I understand, but I don't know how you heal from that either, you know. And then anyway, so just watching what happened to us as people, like I would never have thought that those things would happen, that people would not be there. And anyway, and so that was that experience. And I was going to fast forward to what happened a month later, unless you had any questions on that.
It's hard to process.
It is.
This is why I do what I do. This is, I can't talk. This is why I speak up and speak out and use my voice. Because my voice is what I have. And when I speak, for some reason, people have been listening.
I'm so glad. And I appreciate, that's why I'm also willing to share this story, because I just feel like I want to say to people, you need to look, this is a cheap comparison, but I'm going to use it anyway. The Germans in World War II didn't look. They could just pretend that nothing was happening.
That's right.
Because they didn't look. And it's so easy for all of us to just pretend that we're taking care of each other, and that because they're not looking. And I feel like you need to look, because you don't get to get away with it. You don't get to choose to be ignorant, and you don't get to choose not to care. And we need to be really careful about our priorities as a society, because we are not choosing the right ones. Pretending that somehow masks show love for one another, when it is exactly the opposite. Pretending that somehow it's selfless to force our children to wear masks in school, that is child abuse. And every other generation, the older generation has done whatever they could to make their lives better for their children and grandchildren. And somehow we've inverted that. And I don't understand it. Everybody is important and everybody's life matters, but there is no excuse for what we're doing as a society. There's no excuse. And the fact that we're all going along with it just boggles my mind, And so obviously, I think that if anyone put themselves in my shoes, they would understand why I can't wear a mask. I cannot wear a mask after that experience with my daughter. And so you can imagine what my life has been like since then. I, couldn't even provide groceries for my large family because I wasn't allowed in the grocery stores. I wasn't, and it's not only not allowed, but being treated so badly anywhere I went, And so luckily, that's calmed down a lot. And some stores I know I can shop at now, and I've gotten better at doing who does their grocery shopping online? I never did before, but I've gotten better at that, But anyway, the difficulty of trying to heal when you're constantly re-traumatized.
Right.
Because there's so little support and compassion, because there's just attack you for not wearing a mask or stay away. Anyone who did come over stayed far away and had a mask on as they left something on the porch. And, and I while I appreciate that, that's not what I needed, And so, so anyway, 4 weeks to the day after my baby passed away, my children were playing at a neighbor's house, and the mom and the dad, carried my 7-year-old home because he had fallen. He had climbed up the tree and fallen, they said 15 feet, and his head landed on the bar of the trampoline on the way down.
Oh,
so he was not in good shape. Um, it hadn't bled, but that's actually worse because that means the injury is internal, you know. So he had a big contusion, is that the word? And he was, I don't know if he fully lost consciousness or not, but he didn't know who I was, and he was not not in good shape. So, and it's strange because usually like I don't even, you know, I do home births. We don't usually have much to do with hospitals other than my little 2-year-old who had been in the hospital as a baby. We hadn't had much experience at all. So all of a sudden here we were racing back. You know, I was holding him in the back seat. My husband was driving him to the hospital. I mean, driving us, and I called the hospital to say, "We're on our way. You need to know, you know, this is not good." And they insisted that we call 911. That was the only way they'd help us. So anyway, the ambulance wanted to, they wanted us to be in an ambulance.
Mhm.
And I could not have another child taken from my arms.
Right.
I couldn't do the ambulance because um well, I mean, even after my baby passed away, I couldn't let them come and take, you know, they have so many rules that just make life so hard. And the funeral home, I guess, insisted that they had to come and pick up the body. I couldn't. I felt like I can give her to you, but I can't have her taken from me again. You know, do you understand what I'm saying? And
Yes.
anyway, it was just a really traumatic thing when they took her from me at the hospital, and it has messed me up in some ways, you know. And
No,
so
yes, your baby.
that, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm backing up to my
Yes.
baby when
Yes.
they had taken her for the life
Yes.
flight. And so even trying to get to a place where I could let the funeral home take her was really hard, you know. So having just 4 weeks later being in a situation where the ambulance, they told me that we had to call the ambulance, and I couldn't let them take him, you know. So luckily that we agreed to let the ambulance come because they were so insistent, and we parked and met them. And luckily the EMT was wonderful and let me ride in the ambulance and didn't make me wear a mask. And so that was a blessing. But my my little guy was in really bad shape. So they had the lights on and the sirens, and they were trying to get there before they lost him. And so I mean, you know, they were quite concerned. So my husband was still driving behind the ambulance, and this was the end of June, I think, so still COVID. And we got to the ambulance, I mean, we got to the hospital, and you know, we don't know if this little, I just didn't, I couldn't believe, I didn't know if I was going to lose a second child in a month. And so I think this is more traumatic because I was already traumatized, you know. Anyway, so again, the hospital forced a mask on me. This is an emergency. They're cutting his clothes off, you know, and I can't wear a mask. Like, just the level of overwhelm, you know.
Mhm.
So I tried to kind of hold it on my face, but I was already just not doing great. And I was, you know, just kind of by his head talking to him, and buddy, I'm here, you know, it's mommy, because he was crying and crying for me. And because he didn't, you know, well, when he was conscious, he was crying for me. And so anyway, it was amazing because again, the priority was that I wear a mask. Um, the I think at the hospitals, they're always very concerned about like looking for child abuse, or, you know, so the social services worker was there talking to me and asking me what happened. And I knew I knew that a tantrum was the only method that worked, you know. So I told them, I said, my husband needs to be here. I lost
Mhm.
a baby 4 weeks ago, and I cannot do this again alone. And he's in the waiting room, and you need to let him in. And ma'am, and I just kept like, get my husband now. You know, I let them know that they did not want to pick this fight. And so fortunately they let my husband come in with me because I couldn't do it alone again. Um, but they spent the whole time telling him that I needed to have my mask on. And so the only thing he could do was like, honey, you have to put your mask on. They're gonna kick you out. So so I'm there. I mean, anyway, I was trying. I was trying, but I like I really I don't know. PTSD is a real thing, you know? And so it was amazing because after a little while I noticed that they were taking him to do the x-rays, and we didn't know, they were concerned about a skull fracture or a brain bleed, or they didn't know what the situation was. They were doing all the tests to check for everything, and at one point I noticed, because they only let me go with him and my husband stayed, so when he wasn't there telling me, put your mask on, put your mask, like that, it wasn't actually that helpful to have him there, because he was so scared about them kicking me out that they were making him enforce the mask so they didn't have to, right? And then I noticed that there was a security guard that had been called, and he had his hands on his cuffs and was tailing me anywhere that we went. They had a security guard ready to, I mean, talk about a threat, right? Like, so I had to kind of die inside, is the best I can describe it, in order to put the mask on and leave it on, because I couldn't be kicked out of the hospital. And so after I finally left it on and just kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain the process of, okay, I'll just put it on. And so eventually the security guard left, but again, a traumatized mother with a second child that we don't know if he's going to make it. And the stupid mask was the priority, to the point that they were ready to put me in handcuffs and take me out. And I just don't know how to explain, so my son was admitted, and he actually did remarkably well. He didn't have a fracture, and so his TBI was, he was there for 2 days because he still was not keeping food down or coherent, but after 2 days I couldn't do it anymore. They at least had changed the policy so I didn't have to wear a mask in his room with him. So I was, but it was Sunday night that I checked him out of the hospital, because Monday they were going back to the heightened COVID policies because the numbers were going up or something. And so we were going to be forced to wear masks again. We still were on the 24-hour visitor rule. And so I just felt like I can take care of him at home and he's going to be okay, but I'm not going to be okay if we stay. So we checked him out early and brought him home, and he's doing great. He's recovered really well. But I think that part of the story matters too.
Yes, it does. Because it's the theme of the mask.
Yeah, and
in tragic situations.
And where the priorities have gone.
Right.
And yeah, and interestingly, they didn't test my little boy for COVID, that I remember, but it might have been that I was too, they didn't make me leave to test him. And so, so I don't know if that part happened or not, but yeah, the priority was absolutely the COVID protocols over everything else. And even patient care, because there was no way I was going to leave him in the hospital without me.
No.
And I couldn't do it. And so the hospital's priority, like, they let me check him out early rather than let me be without a mask. And that's not in the best interest of a patient with a TBI, And so anyway, And it's been interesting because it's gone on from there. My husband ended up having a emergency gallbladder surgery.
Goodness gracious.
It's been quite a year, but this was just in probably November or
Mhm.
December. And so it was several months later. But again, I guess this is the situation, again, I like, because my husband doesn't wear masks either, he wasn't traumatized the way I was, but he has shared the same experience, and has the same views. And but they wouldn't let me in the hospital, and they wouldn't let him in unless he wore a mask, even when he was in a life-threatening, extremely painful situation. So I have had to realize that, like, I'm very painfully aware that they would, if I had an emergency, they would either let me die outside the hospital, or they would forcibly mask me in order to provide care. And that's quite a reality to take in. And and I think that it will just go beyond that with the vaccine.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think that, that's quite a thing to realize, that even though, like, I was able to get my son a driver's license, I had to go into the DMV with him, but they let me in there, but the hospital won't let me in.
They let you in without a mask because you
Mhm.
told them ahead
Yeah,
of time.
I was thankful because I didn't know if he'd get a driver's license. So I mean, most places will make some accommodations for
Right.
people who not everywhere. I'm not allowed to go to my son's basketball games. I'm not allowed, there are lots of
Mhm.
places that I can't go, but the hospital is certainly one of them, which I think is shocking.
It's very shocking and it's very sad. And this is where we are in the state of the world right now. And you're very well spoken, Michelle. And I don't know if you realize the amount of support you're probably going to get
Oh, well.
by telling your story. People need to hear this. I had to pull my boys out of school. For the first time, I'm homeschooling them. They're 8 and 11. I will not force them to wear masks. They go to gymnastics, and the policy is to have masks. I say no, they don't.
Mhm.
It's not easy. But like you said, it's like child abuse. We have to say no.
We
More parents need to stand up and say no.
Having my baby in the hospital looking for my smile, and having, I'm a very experienced mother. It made me acutely aware of how much facial communication matters
Right.
at every age of life. My toddlers are constantly checking in to find out from my face if something is scary or dangerous
Right.
or funny, or
Right.
and for the reassurance. And so when
Yes.
we are and then, even my 14-year-old will look at me to see my reaction on a number of things. Right? We're
Yes.
constantly, humans need faces, and what we are doing to our children is stunting their development in such profound ways that I really, really worry for when these kids start becoming adults, what our society will be capable of at that point, because they have been not allowed to receive the humanizing effect that they need from one another and from us. And they've been taught from their infancy that other humans are germ-ridden threats who could kill them, or who they could absolutely accidentally kill. What a horrible, I can't think of a better way to utterly destroy a society. And so while I know how hard it is from experience, I'm so glad to hear that you are not, that you're doing whatever you can to not make your children wear masks. My heart breaks for the parents who don't have a choice. And this cannot be allowed to continue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I interviewed Tammy Clark. She's an OSHA expert.
Mhm.
She is the expert in masks, and said this is just insanity. You know, you look around and people are in masks walking their dogs
Right.
outside by themselves. It hurts me the most to see
Yeah.
the kids, because kids are my first love. I was a pediatric nurse for very, very long, and I don't want to get too much into it, but kids, as you know, when they're little, even 5, 6, 7, and 8, they do what they're told, especially in
Yes.
schools. If they're not feeling good, it might be related to the mask. You know, say they're coming down with a bellyache, a cold, or maybe a low grade fever, and then they have a mask on, and that's going to make it worse. They
Mhm.
can't see their cheeks getting red, them looking even, you know how kids look when they have a fever. They get
Yeah.
a little pale, a little puffy, and then sometimes they get a little red. You can't see that. You have to see the face when a child is not feeling good. And they can go through the whole day wearing a mask and not feeling good because they're just doing what they're told, because they don't have the mature brain power to raise their hand and say, I think it's my mask. Can I take my mask off? Or it just doesn't make me feel good. Not not to mention what they're breathing in and the chemicals, and
Right.
so
And also, children, especially in those young ages, are black and white thinkers. They haven't developed nuance, or right. And so, the only way to teach kids to wear masks is to frame it as good, which means it's bad, right? So we're teaching them this good and bad morality paradigm that is so flawed. And yeah, and then we're also like denying their reality. It's reality abuse, gaslighting, because they say, I
right.
can't breathe in my mask. Yes, you can. My mask is, like they're pulling their
Yes.
mask down to get some fresh air and they're told to put it back on. So they're being taught that they can't even trust their reality. They can't trust their experience. Like it's on so many levels, so bad for them.
Yes. And we're telling them that they have to do it for somebody else.
Hmm.
And that is setting them up to be in abusive relationships,
Yes.
because they're putting their priorities and their needs last.
Hmm.
So that's a whole nother issue for mental health.
And if their grandparents do die, was it their fault? Because they're being taught that they might
Exactly.
accidentally kill somebody they love, which is because they're at no risk. It is more evil than, I mean, I couldn't even come up with something this diabolical. And the fact that we are going along with it is is
Awful.
tragic. I have a sister with cerebral palsy who lives in a group home. And before COVID, she was allowed to she went to her job every day. She went to activities twice a week. And man, her life during COVID
That all
has been
ended.
dismal,
Right.
dismal. She's in her little room, not allowed to have visitors except in the little parking lot where you have to be in a mask. And anyway, it's again, it's loosened up and gotten better in the past few months, but she lived that way for 7 months. And it is just unthinkable what we are doing. And so, yeah, I think that my story is more palpable for a lot of people because of the tragedy of it. But it certainly isn't the only, as you well know, it's a piece of the horror that we are experiencing and complicit in, going along with, pushing on one another. All of us have been taught to blame and shame. And,
Yes.
like it's been so interesting to watch people who are really big on the COVID narrative get sick
Mhm.
because they're so angry at those careless people who got them sick. But then they also have to deal with, oh no, I hope I didn't get anyone else sick, because we have
Yes.
weaponized a virus to
Yes.
tear ourselves apart because we've lost all humanity. There's no compassion, there's no charity left. It's all been turned into this virtue signaling about masks. If you love people, wear a mask, not if you love people, be loving to people.
Right.
It's upside down and an inverted morality and inverted reality that I hope we can get people to see past, because we're not gonna we're not gonna make it if we don't. Our society is gonna be becomes something that we don't want to experience.
Well, I couldn't have said that any better, Michelle. That is very, very powerful. That is so much truth to that. And is there anything else that you would like the world to know right now? Anything that you think that people should do?
I guess my plea, this is what I've told my children because I have kids in all ages, please stop complying. A wise parent with some experience has been taught to choose their battles, right? You learn pretty fast to pick your battles, especially when you have a kid who is good at throwing tantrums. And we need to teach society, like our government and the enforcers of this, to pick their battles. We can't make it easy for them. So don't wear a mask. Don't wear a mask. And then when the threats come and when they bring the battle to you, then you can choose what to do. But you've at least made them battle. You've at least made them recognize a little bit more what they are. And I just am desperate to tell people, stop complying. Stop complying. Don't do it. Don't give in to the social pressure. Don't give in to the shaming. Don't give in to any of it. We have to, I mean, obviously, people have to do what they feel is right, and people's courage is on a continuum, but it is not kind. It is not kindness to join someone in a delusion or a lie to make them feel good. That's not kind. And so we're excluded from some family, we're excluded, people that would rather not have us around. And, I can be kind and say, oh, okay, I understand. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm not going to join in the lie to make you feel good. And so, people obviously don't have a reason to be where I am, where I'm traumatized by masks, but it feels so good to me to see somebody else not wearing a mask. It makes me feel like I have some amount of sanity and I'm not the
Right.
only one. So
Right.
that is my plea, is please stop complying. We have to do it for our kids. We have to just don't make it easy for them in any way possible. And everyone make the decision. I mean, I understand some people have to for work, and I'm not saying that it's bad to wear a mask. I'm just desperately asking people, do as much as you can to not comply, because that's, I think, our best hope at this point. But,
Yes.
and Erin, I also want to thank you so much for taking the time to let me share things that I think are so important, and for everything you are doing. I am so profoundly appreciative to those who are joining in this effort to speak truth and to return sanity and humanity to our civilization. So thank you.
Yes, that is my goal. We hope that will work. Okay, so tell me your daughter's name again.
Avonlea Grace.
Avonlea Grace.
Hmm.
Can we say a silent prayer or out loud? Avonlea Grace's presence, her birth, her life, um, brought to the world in beauty, perfect form, and brings the message of healing, of hope, of peace, love, and kindness. Every single birth has a purpose, a reason to live, a reason to be here. And she's using you right now to speak to the entire nation, to the entire world, to get the message out, to come back home, come back to heart, come back to peace, come back to love. And for that, we are ever so grateful for her and for you, Michelle. You're a beautiful, loving, kind, caring person. You are the mother that everybody deserves to have. You fought, you had appropriate temper tantrums, and that's what a true mother is. That's what's called a mother bear. So I thank you. I thank you for speaking. I know it was very difficult for you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to work through this with you. And I wish you peace on your healing, and know that you are loved, your family is loved, and your beautiful daughter will always, always and forever be in your heart, be in my heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin.
All
That
right.
was beautiful.
Stay in touch, okay?
Will do.